If you liked Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, you'll enjoy Total War Warhammer 3. Shocking, right? That's it. This isn't a review of the game. I'm not going to give you an arbitrary score at the end or tell you whether or not to purchase it. I've made dozens of videos about the game, and every other channel who got early access to the game did as well. So pretending we don't endorse it would just be hypocritical. But nobody watches these to hear how great the game they just bought is. They want to hear someone talk shit for an hour. So I'm going to share with you every thought I had over the last month of playing Total War Warhammer 3. Good, bad, and occasionally ugly. In the end, you can parse that information as you please and decide if my critique is valid or not. Back when I was a teacher, I found it best to do this like a poop sandwich, starting and ending with something positive so everyone remembers that there's no hard feelings. Because I do think this is the fullest and best made version of Warhammer that Total War has made. Graphically, it's gorgeous. The reworked lighting in particular makes filming and taking screenshots a dream without any additional need for a reshade preset. The overall color palette is brighter and pops more, with the animations and unit design taking center stage. There's new grass rendering and the option to enable cloth physics that apply to certain unit dresses and capes. The Chaos Realms themselves are very well done and an interesting concept. Each lord and their realm feels unique and different, and the art department deserves whatever the game equivalent is of an Oscar for their work. But all those bits of eye candy come at a price. The game runs noticeably worse. In Warhammer 2, I could do 4K with max settings before I noticed frame drops while filming. To prevent them in Warhammer 3, I have to go down to 1440p, and that's with an i9 processor and an NVIDIA RTX 3070 graphics card. Everyone I've asked, in fact, reports a 10 to 20 frames per second drop from the previous game. If you played on Ultra in Warhammer 2, plan to play on high settings here. We've been told optimization patches are coming, but Attila Total War still suffers from these same poor optimization problems to this day, so take that with a grain of salt. Features-wise, Warhammer 3 brings in mechanics piloted in other games. Diplomacy from Three Kingdoms and Troy have made it in, and is a decidedly welcome addition, taking the guesswork out of the negotiation system. Though the AI logic of when a faction decides to make a trade deal with you or allow confederation is still frustratingly vague. Another old annoyance is that if an army refuses to fight you, you will still endlessly chase them across your territory, march stancing past you every single time, or withdrawing just outside of the edge of your movement range if you do happen to catch them. Of all the annoyances in the game, this is the one easiest solved, as previous Total War games modified the campaign map movement distance based on army composition. If you had an all-cavalry army, it would move further on the map. Infantry or siege equipment would slow it down, meaning you could build armies specifically to chase others down or keep away from them. There's even simple mods that solve this by adding slight bonuses to campaign movement range when you're in your own territories. So there's really no reason for this to still be present in Warhammer 3. Other requested features from previous Total War games didn't make the cut here either. Units on the battlefield still don't carry banners, there are no musicians, mounts don't have separate health pools from their lords like in Troy, also unit weapon swapping didn't make it over, and terrain obstacles like mud and tall grass didn't make the port either. You still can't respec a lord's skills, and photo mode is also missing, though that last one will likely be added later. The omission of all these features feels purposeful, like the game designers felt it didn't fit with Warhammer 3's new gamey direction. The conscious decision by CA to create something that is less warfare simulation and more video game. It's best illustrated with the new survival battles game mode, which I was critical of in the preview last year. Many of my complaints remain the same. They still feel overly long, and due to the heavy scripting used, are prone to crashes and random bugs, forcing you to fight them over again in their entirety. After playing through them once in each Chaos Realm, I found myself auto-resolving them just to save time, and this was a common sentiment across many in early access. They're cool once, but the entire style of play, strength of the units, and flow of the battle is just so different from the rest of the game Survival battles almost feel out of place. Once you play one once, most of you aren't going to seek them out again in a campaign. Survival battles seem to have been created to showcase the siege supplies system, which also appears in the new multiplayer domination mode and, of course, siege battles. Whether supplies or survival battles came first is a chicken or egg question. Regardless, the new supplies system is peppered throughout Warhammer 3 and basically unavoidable if you don't like it. Which brings us to my first controversial take. I don't like the siege rework. This sentiment is one I may be alone in, but I wanted to make sure to include it here. Minor settlement battles are a welcome addition as they add variety to what you're doing, but Troy, Thrones, and Three Kingdoms all did their minor siege maps better, with more interesting design and layouts, without the need to accommodate a supplies system. And their layout, especially that of the major settlements, misses the point of a walled city, which is to say, the new siege maps feel very gamey. They're less about being a defensible structure and more about being a game map. By the way, if you hear a baby cooing in the background, I'm giving a bottle at the same time as recording this. Thanks to the new supplies system, you can add low walls, towers, and traps to various predetermined spots on the map. But the wide avenues that lead directly into the capture point of your settlement still stand wide open, and the locations where you can build things frequently feel arbitrary and more like additional buttons to click for busy work, so that in addition to your 20 units, you'll also have to contend with dodgy click zones scattered around the map. Literally, it's difficult to find where to click on these sometimes, which is funny because they're so garishly colored and obtrusive, you'd think you couldn't miss them. Constructed towers are surrounded by fancy architecture that looks gorgeous on the map, but all of these bits of decoration have collision enabled, so when your tower shoots, it will hit anything around it in the line of sight between it and whatever random unit it chooses to fire at, because you can't control them. While defending, you still can't hold the outer wall or stop attacks before they come inside because everyone and their mother can pull a ladder out of their butt. And I'm sure this all sounds like an old man's complaints, but it all adds up to a system that is overwhelming in the amount of information that you must parse. Can that narrow alley actually be accessed by attacking troops? Will this tower be in a location where it can actually hit something? Besides leaving a token archer there to keep the towers firing, what's the point of the outer walls? For me, it harkens back to Medieval 2 Total War, where every last bit of these same defenses was already built into the map. There were exterior walls with very powerful towers, then an interior set of walls with, guess what, more towers, and finally a keep with, shockingly, even more towers built into it. This wasn't particularly fair to the attacker, but it wasn't supposed to be. It's a siege. Here the game design strives for fair odds for both attacker and defender. To put it another way, these maps are built like the Battle of Winterfell. Warhammer 3 is a fantasy game, but often forgets it's based on reality. The one use of the supply system I do like is the calling in of reinforcements in survival battles. But weirdly, you can't do that in regular siege defenses. Especially on forts along the Great Bastion, this would have been a great addition and a logical extension of the system, yet it's absent. People complained about sieges being bad in Warhammer 2, but the solutions here address the symptoms and not the root causes, and I'd say a few of them are now even worse. 360-degree battles sounded good on paper, but when you see a massive city like Altdorf reduced to a tiny map, you see the consequences. Compare that to the epic majesty of Warhammer 2, now the AI can't effectively juggle a four-sided attack and control all of its capture zones as well, making it easy enough to run your cavalry down one of the dozen streets that cross these maps and bypass the defending units. With enough macro, it basically becomes a large game of Pac-Man. It's also bad that I just skip major sieges outright now and find myself annoyed that this is the system we're permanently saddled with for the rest of Warhammer's history. My harshest criticism, though, I reserve for the continued use of a separate Blood DLC. Previously, the Creative Assembly has stated this is to preserve the game's PEGI 16 rating and boost sales, but this argument strains credibility. To put the Blood DLC in a broader context of the gaming industry, 5 out of the top 10 selling games in the United States last year were rated PEGI 18. The Creative Assembly themselves have released PEGI PEGI 18 games previously with Alien Isolation and Spartan, as well as Viking Total Warrior, so it's not as if they have a moral objection or some kind of block from Sega. To my mind, most damningly is the knowledge that Total War's audience has always skewed older, with over 95% of you over the age of 18 based on YouTube analytics. So it's not a case of protecting the precious minds of their young player base either, and even then, many PEGI 18 games include an option to toggle off objectionable content if that was the concern. CA's dogged refusal to increase the PEGI rating for Total War becomes increasingly obtuse when you see literal fountains of blood and diarrhea-spewing monsters in a game that includes characters who fixate on decay, skulls, body dysmorphia, and bondage. To my mind, the Blood DLC practice has gone on far too long, and CA and its parent company Sega know exactly what they're doing, and it's time for it to stop. Gameplay-wise, at least, thankfully, Blood makes no difference, but players on day one should brace themselves for a slew of tiny bugs and weirdnesses. I haven't encountered any that impact the long-term viability of a campaign or make the game, quote, unplayable. They do make characters unable to move for a turn, though, make units move oddly or not at all, give weird stat bonuses, or have scripts not trigger correctly so you end up kind of frozen. All of these, though, mercifully can be fixed in time, and we should expect a rather hefty bug fix patch for the game a month after its release. Some annoyances, though, are a bit odd to still find in the game, as they were present in previous Warhammer games and are still here. The gate bug still rears its ugly head, and enemy armies can still retreat through controlled areas like the gates of the Great Bastion. Giving the player a hard close toggle ability would solve both of these problems, making it so nothing could pass through those locations while active. And since we're on specifics, we should probably talk about a few of the playable factions. Scarbrand plays exactly like he should. He's Tarox 2.0, an angry mobile death machine chopping his way to victory by collecting skulls along the way. CA nailed it with Scarbrand, even if he does feel a bit familiar. Nurgle is meh? They tried for some new building systems here, and they are interesting, but they take away player agency. These circles of life leave you waiting for them to spin back around again to actually recruit the units you want. Kugath's unique Plague Cauldron mechanic feels like a copy and paste of Grom's Cauldron with less interesting buffs and benefits, and all of Nurgle's units are terribly slow moving in battle. Which is intentional, but I mean, they're really slow, and you might die of old age before the fight actually begins. I mean, it doesn't help that they're recruited at low health, so they take several turns to replenish when you first get them, and if they're injured, they take even more turns to replenish, which is a problem as replenishment varies greatly in Nurgle's early game and can take seemingly forever. Warhammer 3 could in fact be subtitled The Waiting Game. It comes up so much. Enter a Chaos Realm? Wait a turn. Stepped through a portal? Wait a turn. Just finished a Chaos Realm? Well, you've got a negative buff on you, so you better sit in your capital a few turns until it's removed. Waiting a random number of turns. So many aspects of the game slow you down and force you to take extra time sitting there doing nothing. For Cathay, playing as Miao Ying defending the wall nails the feeling of being the last line of defense against a horde of barbarians. Her campaign is at its most fun when you're standing on that wall. Assaults on the Bastion create a ticking timer you always have to be prepared for, and the caravan routes mechanic provides you with much needed income to keep your armies afloat. Yao Ming, on the other hand, has toot all to do with the Great Bastion, yet still has the invasion mechanic anyway. If you fail to support your sister and let it fall, you may have to deal with it afterwards. Maybe, but humans can't even agree to fight climate change, so you can imagine how incentivized you'll be to help Miao Ying. Yao Ming is the trade guy, Miao Ying is the wall lady, yet they both have the other's mechanics. It's like CA created unique mechanics for each legendary lord, like they were doing with the demons, and then felt there wasn't enough for the human lords to do, so they squished them together to be available to everyone. I feel this is especially obvious with Costleton. The religious support mechanic makes sense as you vie for control of the motherland, where CA wants you to build up a resource, spend that on a limited time buff and quest, to then generate another resource that is actually tracked for the mechanic, which again feels like a time waste where we could have just skipped the middleman and generated supporters directly. but it's also infinitely faster to just take Kislev by force and then spam churches afterwards. The bar fills so slowly that by the time you have enough diplomatic relations to confederate other Kislev tribes, they've already been conquered by your opponent. It is quite clever though that Katerin and Konstantin can't declare war on each other directly, so you'll be forced to interact with the mechanic eventually. I just wished it moved faster. As others have pointed out though, it's just a shame they didn't apply that same system so that your allies couldn't declare war on your vassals. The unlockable character Boris Ursus is the most glaring example of mechanic reuse I have seen, repurposing both of Kislev's for the third time, except he doesn't even directly compete for power. You can only support someone else. If they win, you get nothing. I strongly suspect Boris was added late in the development cycle due to the deafening yawn that accompanied Konstantin, because this mechanic just makes no sense with him. It's still better than poor Be'lakor though, who after you complete the campaign is playable only as a recruitable general for that save file. For all the advisor's promises of infinite power at the campaign's start, it's a bit odd he's the only thing you get for winning. No buffs, no money, no nothing else. And everyone has just been left hoping that Be'lakor will eventually get his time in the sun and his own campaign on the combined map. Across the board, faction mechanics really could just use another pass for playability. The ogres are particularly annoying in their pseudo-horde design, bringing back the hated Skaven food mechanic for some reason. Early game, you'll have to stay close to camps to keep from taking massive attrition when the food inevitably runs out. This wouldn't be a problem if the ogre camps you built could move, but they have a limited number, and once you plunk one down, they're stuck there. All of your top-tier buildings or units are based in those camps, and yet you can only recruit them in a very narrow radius. So you'll either always be wandering back to it or constantly be using the global recruitment system and paying double. Talking with other ogre players, we agree that the ability to relocate the camp every 10 turns or so would be a huge benefit to the smoothness of the early game. Even increasing its radius and food as the camp leveled would be an immense help, but why they chose to lock the horde down to one location is just beyond me. When combined, the new mechanics in Warhammer steer away from the old sandbox gameplay loop of build, fight, conquer, and tries very hard to venture into the RPG Paradox Plaza game territory, with constant micromanagement of skill trees and diplomacy, and a fair bit of user interface bloat. The new allied recruitment system is an especially egregious example, as the mechanic itself is very cool and allows you to take on missions to improve relations with factions and recruit from their unit pools. But the whole thing is buried so deep in the diplomacy system that it's hard to find, and it's very finicky to work with. It really needs its own dedicated UI panel, but with so many other buttons already competing for space on the main screen, where would it even go? And that's really all I have to whinge and bellyache about at the moment. In general, CA tried to innovate here and push forward some new ideas, some of which were good, some of which were less so. The Demon Prince represents a major jump forward with Warhammer 3, allowing players to customize a character's looks and abilities entirely to their liking, and the possibilities it opens up are truly astonishing, and in the right hands could lead to a design-a-leader option for nearly every faction in the game. Similarly, the Prologue campaign shows CA taking a crack at narrative campaign gameplay, a first for them, and it's brilliant. Lots of dialogue, lots of cutscenes, set pieces, and scripted battles. I would be very interested to play a longer, fully narrative campaign as it opens up immense narrative possibilities, and hope to see more of this from CA in the future. 8-player simultaneous multiplayer is huge, and something I thought I would never see in a Total War game. It's wondrous to behold, and something I hope you'll all take advantage of. And at just over 6 pages typed, I'm done, which will undoubtedly make this one of the shorter critiques you'll see on the internet, because at the end of the day, Warhammer 3 is a good game. I've had more fun playing it than any of the previous Total War Warhammer titles, but like the Vortex campaign in Warhammer 2, I look forward to ditching its scenario campaign restrictions for the sandbox of the combined world map. You can really see the progress CA has made across all 3 games and the lessons learned along the way, even if some of them appear to have been the wrong lessons. The great thing about being the last in the trilogy, though, is that this is the one that will be sticking around. There's no more, oh, we'll fix it in the next game. It's here or it's not at all. Games are no longer designed in a bubble. There's a give and there's a take with the community that plays it, and ideally, there's a polite communication of expectations. Warhammer 3 meets nearly all of them, but like any work of art, there is always a bit more to be done, so don't let me scare you away. Enjoy the game, come up with an opinion of your own, and when you do, come back here and tell me how wrong I am. But until then, give it a try, and thanks for watching.